Okay, so we are in Sanhedrin. We didn't have a shiur last week due to emergency grandparent duties. Baruch Hashem, my grandson is now recovered from his very nasty mouth ulcers, and so I'm allowed back to the shiur. So 2 weeks ago, we spoke about Chizkiyahu again. Chizkiyahu Hamelech, King Hezekiah in English, he intercalated a year and then regretted it and asked for mercy from God for having done something wrong. And our Gemarah that we've been discussing over the last few months is all about intercalating the year. And over the last few weeks, we've been discussing the various opinions as to what it was that Chizkiyahu did wrong that he felt he had to ask forgiveness for. And the last thing that we did at the end of the shiur 2 weeks ago was we came to the conclusion that what he had done wrong was that he had intercalated a year on the 30th day of Adar, which might have been the 1st of Nisan. And what was so bad about that was that we have a Torah law that says HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chadoshim, that Nisan has to be the first month of the year. And so if you intercalate in Nisan, you will then have 2 Nisans, and therefore the second Nisan cannot be the first month of the year, and that is not allowed. So you cannot intercalate after the end of Adar. So you'll say to me, well, so what? The 30th of Adar is Adar, and you would be right. But we know, don't we? And this is where we ended the shiur 2 weeks ago with a question from Leon. Don't think, by the way, that I remember all of this. I just re-looked at it last night when I was preparing. But Leon asked a question and said, this 30th of Adar, it could be the 1st of Nisan because witnesses would come. And that was correct. Witnesses would come, and it could be that the 30th of Adar might be the 1st of Nisan. If they don't come, then the 30th of Adar is the 30th of Adar, and the 31st of Adar becomes the 1st of Nisan. We, of course, don't have any of that now because we have a fixed calendar. But because the 30th of Adar has a possibility of being the 1st of Nisan, we don't allow intercalation beyond the 29th of Adar because the 30th of Adar is a sort of a possibility of being Nisan, and we don't want the Nisan to be intercalated. Now, the opinion in the Gemarah where we left it was that the thing that Chizkiyahu did wrong and that he had to apologize for and ask for forgiveness for was that he intercalated on the 30th of Adar. And that is where we left it. I'm going to share the screen with you now. Those of you who are in the Steinsaltz Gemarah, it's on page 64. It should be on the screen for you now. It's over here. Can you see it? Yes. Okay. Those of you who are in the Art Scroll or in any other Vilna Shas, it is 2/3 of the way down on 12b. Now, this is where we left it. Let's just do this again, which I've just explained to you. Iu Stavar, Chizkiyahu held that Ein Ma'abrim et Hashana b'Yom Shloshim shel Adar. We don't intercalate the year on the 30th of Adar, Hoil v'Ra'ui likba'o Nisan, since it is fitting, it is possible that day may be fixed as Nisan. That's where we stopped 2 weeks ago. What we're going to do now is we're going to have a look at another opinion as to what it was that Chizkiyahu did wrong. And what I said to you at the end of the shiur 2 weeks ago was that we were going to look and see whether women count for anything. Okay, remember that? Well, here we're going to find out the answer. because Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, this is a different Rabbi Shimon to the Rabbi Shimon we spoke about before. How do we know that? Well, it says so. Mishum Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Shimon. So obviously two different people, otherwise he would just say he said. So this is a quote that Rabbi Shimon has made, and he's being quoted by Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda. And he says this, Mipnei shehisi et Yisrael la'asot Pesach Sheni. Now, again, isn't it amazing how our learning always seems to fit in with the time of year? Because we have had Pesach Sheni earlier this week, did we not? How do we know that we had Pesach Sheni, Michael Krauss?
Because I ate matzah on the day.
Did you? That was
Yep.
very good. Especially because it was Pesach Sheni.
Yep.
Good for you. Well, most people wouldn't do that, but that's great. I think we should do that. It's a great minhag. No, the reason that we all knew it was Pesach Sheni is because we didn't say Tachanun. That's these days, that's just about the only thing that Pesach Sheni is marked with, apart from in the Krauss household, is by not saying Tachanun. But that was earlier this week. So according to Rabbi Shimon, the thing that Chizkiyahu did wrong is that he told everybody to do the Korban Pesach not on the 14th of Nisan, but on the 14th of Iyar, on Pesach Sheni. So why did he do that? Well, the Gemarah asks that question. Heichi Domi, what's going on here? Heichi Domi, what are the circumstances of this story? So, Amar Rav Ashi explains what was going on here. Kagon, this was a situation that was, for example, Shahayu Yisrael, Mechza Tmeim, Mechza Tahorim. What word can you see in the middle of Mechza there? Come on, Avril, you've done Ulpan. What word can you see in the middle of that word, Mechza?
Mechza.
Chatzi.
Chatzi, yes, Leslie, well done. Chetzi. What's Chetzi mean?
Half.
Half. That's right. So, in Israel, half of them were Tamei, half of them were impure, Mechza, Tahorim, and half of them were pure. Now, what is our halacha? We know our halacha, which this whole Gemarah is based on, is the fact that if more than half of the population are Tamei, then we are allowed to bring an offering. The people are allowed to bring the offering. So if there had been 51% of impure people, then there would have been no need to fall back on the safety net of Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni, remember, was for those people who were Tamei on Pesach Rishon, on the main Pesach, they got a second chance. It was a bit like the resits. You know, when you failed your exams the first time in the summer, you've got a chance to resit them in the autumn before the next term started. Thankfully, I never had to do that, but lots of people did, and they got a second chance. And that's Pesach Sheni. But if more than 50% of the people were pure, you don't have to fall back on Pesach Sheni, because you're allowed to do Pesach Rishon, because the halacha is that if most of the people are Tamei, then you do it Betumah, whilst they're Tamei. And so the situation here was that half were Tamei and half were Tahor. Now, we've got a problem, haven't we? Because does that count? Is that the majority? Well, I would say to you, that's not the majority. 50% is not a majority. 50% is half. Now, is it a majority of people tahor? No, it isn't. But the halacha does not say if there is a majority of the people who are tahor, you can't do it. What the halacha says is that if there's a majority of the people who are tamei, then you can do it. Do you understand the subtle difference there? So the fact that the halacha says that in order for the basic halacha, which is if you're tamei, you can't bring a korban. In order for that to be overridden, you need a majority of tamei people. So therefore, in a situation where it was 50-50, you would have to say, sorry, the halacha of bringing a korban when you're tamei being forbidden cannot be overridden because we don't have a majority of tamei people. Yeah, it's a bit like when you, since we're talking about Pesach, when you break the matzah early on, and you do yachatz. By the way, what's the root of the word yachatz? Chetzi, correct, same word, because you're breaking it in half, aren't you? So yachatz in the Pesach, in the Seder Haggadah, is when you split the matzah. Now, which bit do you hide for the afikoman, the larger or the smaller piece? Come on, you've done it for 1,000,000 years. Which one? Go on, you got a 50-50 chance. Somebody have a guess. Come on, be brave. Julia, what do you think? The larger or the smaller?
Well, I would have thought the larger because it's got to feed more people. But
you're right, it is the larger one. Well done. So what happens if you split it exactly 50-50? You've got a problem, haven't you? Because you can't, and we have this discussion every single year around our Seder because somebody reads out in the Haggadah, you break the matzah and the larger half is hidden. That's what it says in somebody's machzah. The more accurate ones say the larger portion, but some of them say the larger half. And then some clever dick round the table always says you can't have a larger half because a half is a half. So why am I telling you all that nonsense? Because that here is exactly what we've got. We've got exactly half-half. Half-half is not larger than. And so therefore, the halacha would be, if it was exactly half-half, those who were tamei would have to have their Korban Pesach on Pesach Sheni, not on Pesach Rishon. So that's the situation. They were half-half. But the Gemarah goes on to tell us a different situation. When we say they were half-half, what we're talking about are the men. Okay, the men. 50% of the men were tahor, pure, and 50% were tamei. What about the women? Well, it turns out that the women were more pure than the men. Okay, so the women were more than 50-50 pure. They were, let's say, 60-40 pure. The nashim, we're back in the Gemarah here, second to last line. The nashim and the women, mashlimot latahorim. They complete. Can you see the word shalom in there, in the middle? What does shalom mean? Shalom means peace, right? But it also means, if you change it, there's slightly the voweling, shalem. It's the same root. What does the word shalem mean?
Complete. Is it anything to do with paying?
Well, it is actually, yes. It's the same root, but you're right. L'shalem is to pay. And why is l'shalem to pay? Because the word shalem means, Leslie,
Complete.
complete, correct. So when you pay, Julia, you have completed the transaction. That's why l'shalem is to pay. So shalem is complete. So v'nashim mashlimot, it's a verb here. The women complete or make up latahorim. They add on to the pure people, v'odfot alehem, and then that makes them more. That increases their number, and they are then in the majority. Now, there's another word I can teach you over here from this word odfot. Who can see a commonly used modern Hebrew word over here in this word odfot?
Odef.
Odef means
Change.
change, correct. It means the what's left over. What's left over. So if you go and you pay for a 60 shekel item with 100 shekel notes, you will get 40 shekel odef change. So that's a word there. And there's another word which we use regularly, which is from that root. Marcel, have you got another one you can tell us that comes from that?
What about daf?
Daf is a page.
Oh, daf.
Ooh, I don't know. Don't think so. We need an iron in there, Leon. Ayin dalad pay. Ma'adif. What does ma'adif mean?
Oh, prefer.
Prefer. That's right. And look over here. Latahorim v'odfot alehem. These women were added on to the number of the pure people, and their number became preferable, if you like. In other words, they completed the number, and therefore there were more pure people than there were impure people. Okay, so then this was our scenario that Chizkiyahu was faced with. He's got half and half. He doesn't know what to do. And then he thinks, I know, I've got a lot of pure women here. So I'm going to add the pure women into the numbers. And therefore, the pure will be higher in number than the impure. And so therefore, I cannot allow the impure people to do their Korban on Pesach Rishon. And so I'm going to advise them to do their Korban on Pesach Sheni. Well, that sounds fair enough to me. Anybody got any objections to that, of Chizkiyahu's logic? No? Good. Well, I don't think there is any problem with that at all. However, there must have been a problem, mustn't there? Because what did Chizkiyahu do next? He apologized and sought forgiveness for doing such an outrageous thing. Well, what was it that was outrageous? Let's have a look. Let's carry on. Me'ikara, from the beginning, initially, Savar, he thought that Nashim Barishon Chova, that women are obliged by halacha to partake of or to participate in the Korban Pesach. Chova, Nashim Barishon Chova, from the word chiyuv, obligation. He held, initially when he made his decision, he held that women were obliged to bring the Korban Pesach. Dahavi miotan tmein umiotan mitchula Pesach Sheni. And so, therefore, because he thought that these women were obliged to bring the Korban Pesach, it turned out that only a minority of those obliged to bring the Korban Pesach were impure, and so he pushed it off. He pushed off the Tameh ones to Pesach Sheni, which is what we've already said. Ula Basof, and at the end, afterwards, Savar, he realized, he changed his opinion, that Nashim Barishon Rishut, women are only permitted to do the Korban Pesach. They are not obliged to do so. And if they are only permitted and not obliged to do so, then you can't add them in to the calculation, because the calculation is worked on those who are obliged to do the Korban Pesach. Now, why would it be that women would not be obliged to do the Korban Pesach? Women,
Because they were cooking.
actually, that's absolutely correct.
Because it's not time bound.
Correct. Well, it is time bound. That's what you mean, because it's a time bound mitzvah. Now, we all know, don't we, that all positive commandments that are bound by time, women are not obligated in. That doesn't mean they're not allowed, but they're not obligated to. So therefore, davening shacharis is a time-bound mitzvah. You can only daven shacharis at a certain time, after the dawn and before midday. So therefore, women are not obliged to daven shacharis. Same for mincha, same for mariv. That's why women are not obliged to daven. They're not obliged to wear talit and tefillin, because that is a mitzvah that can only be done by day, and therefore it is time bound. Now, the reason that women are not obligated by time bound mitzvah is exactly for the reason that Julia said. They're too busy. They're busy cooking or looking after the kids or doing all the difficult jobs that women have to do throughout the day. Men, on the other hand, can be idle, sitting around doing whatever they need to do at work or in their yeshivas, or sitting on street corners having coffees, or whatever men do while women are working hard at home. They are not bound by time so much, and so therefore they have to do the time-bound mitzvahs. Women are far too busy to bother themselves with trivia like mitzvahs, because they're too busy cooking and doing other important things like raising children. And so women are not obligated by time-bound mitzvah. Doesn't mean they're not allowed to. So when you see a woman at the women of the wall wearing their talis and tefillin, they're not doing anything wrong. I mean, halachically, they're not doing anything wrong. If they're using it as a stick to beat the men with, as often they are, well, then they are doing something wrong. But if they genuinely feel a desire to be close to God by wearing talis and tefillin, then there's nothing wrong with that at all, even though they're not obliged to do so. Whether they should say a bracha on these things is another question, because, of course, the bracha says, Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. We bless God who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to do whatever that mitzvah is, lahaniach tefillin, to place tefillin. The question is whether a woman can say that because she's not actually commanded to do so. So that's a different question. But for a woman to wear tefillin and talit, or to do any other time-bound mitzvah that they choose to do, is not problematic. They've not done an aveira, as is often the thought to be the case. They're just not obliged to do it. Now, the Korban Pesach is extremely time-bound. When do you bring the Korban Pesach? When is the time for the Korban Pesach? Marcel, when do you bring the Korban Pesach?
Bring it in the morning before the Yetziat Mitzrayim.
No, I'm talking about the original one. I'm talking about every year. When you have in the time of the Bet HaMikdash, yes. When was the Korban Pesach brought?
On the 14th of Nisan.
Correct. The 14th of Nisan, Bein Ha'arbayim, in the afternoon. It has to be brought in the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan. You have a very, very small window of opportunity, time-wise, to bring your Korban Pesach. You can't bring it in the morning, and you can't bring it the day before. Now, just think about this for a minute. Huge numbers of people were Ole Regel, went up to pilgrimage to Jerusalem to bring their Korban Pesach, and they all had to bring it in the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan. Just as an aside, if you read an account in Josephus, Josephus was a Jewish man who became a Roman. He was a historian. He wrote a history of the Jews. We have a tremendous amount of knowledge which we have gained about what went on at the time of the end of the time of the Second Temple when Josephus lived, from his writings. Very, very important historical person, Josephus. He writes about the 14th of Nisan. He describes the path up to Har Habayit, going up into Jerusalem from the valleys up into the Jerusalem hills, as being a complete sea of white, because all these people were bringing their korbanot, their little lambs and their little kids, and that place was a sea of white. Now, if you figure out the numbers, it must have been an unbelievable situation going on there, because there were tens of thousands probably of korbanot that had to be done in this time period. And I once worked it out years ago that you had something like 15 seconds per shechita, because you've got to do the shechting, collect the blood, take it to the altar and sprinkle it. Well, there's a rate limiting step there, because you've only got one altar. You can shecht loads of things at the same time, but you can only sprinkle one at a time. Anyway, it must have been a rather amazing feat to have this done all in with such precision and such sort of time constrained periods. The point is that this is just about as time constrained mitzvah as you can possibly get. And so therefore, it's not unreasonable for a suggestion that women would not be obliged to do it. What was crazy was Chizkiyahu thought that they were in the first place. And that's really a question against Chizkiyahu. But this seems to be the situation. This was Chizkiyahu's thinking, that initially he thought that women were obliged to do the Korban Pesach, and in the end, he decided they were not. And therefore, if they were not, then they can't be added into the numbers. And the numbers would have been such, he then worked out, that there would have been slightly more Tameh people and Tahor people obliged. And therefore, he was wrong to have pushed off their Korban Pesach to Pesach Sheni. Now, that's a serious business, because what it means is that all those people have done the Korban Pesach on the wrong date. And that's a big problem, because a Korban Pesach is a Torah law, and it has to be done, as Marcel has said, on the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan. The afternoon of the 14th of Iyar is only for those who fail their exams in Nisan and were Tameh. Okay, so he caused them to do the wrong thing, and that is why he had to seek mercy, as the Pasuk says, for his error. That's the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Now, the whole discussion about this, whether women are obliged in the Korban Pesach or not. Let me just get rid of that phone call. Excuse me. There we go. The whole discussion about whether women are obliged or only allowed on the Korban Pesach takes place in a different Gemarah. Not surprisingly, well, okay, let me ask this question. Which Gemarah do you think discusses whether women are obliged to bring the Korban Pesach or not?
Pesachim.
Yes, Pesachim. Well done. That was an easy question. And it's on 91b. Okay, it's on what 91b. Okay, and I'm going to take you to 91b now in the Safaria, because it's really interesting, this discussion as to why you think that they should be, because we've just spent the last 10 minutes saying, well, it's pretty obvious, isn't it, that they're not obliged because it's a time-bound mitzvah. So why would anybody think that it was that they were obliged? Because if I can work it out, then certainly Chizkiyahu HaMelech could work it out. Why did he think otherwise? I'm going to show you the Gemarah now in Pesachim. 91b. Here it goes. Let me know when it's on the screen. It should be there in a second or two. There we go. Okay. So let's just go over here a little bit further up. Okay. I'll just read the English. The Gemarah returns to discuss the matter. The Brisa, which was cited earlier on in this Gemarah, states as follows: a woman on the first Pesach, that means Pesach Rishon, that means the real Pesach, let's call it that, in Nisan, one slaughters a Paschal lamb on her behalf, even if she is by herself, meaning that she's obliged to do it. Okay, she might not be able to shecht herself, right? But a man might not be able to shecht herself. So I don't shecht my own animals. I have a sheichet to do it for me. So a sheichet can shecht the Korban Pesach for a woman, according to this brisa. And on the second Pesach, on Pesach Sheni, we make her ancillary to others. In other words, she can join other people in a group for a Korban Pesach, but we don't slaughter a lamb for her and on herself because she's not obliged in Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni was only for men. Okay, and you're going to see why in a minute. So at this part of the brisa, we've got Pesach Rishon, everyone's obliged, men and women, and Pesach Sheni, only men are obliged. Okay, this is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi says no. It's both. Women are obliged on both Pesachs, Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. Rabbi Yossi says a woman on the second Pesach, one slaughters for her, even if she's by herself. And needless to say, that also applies to the first Pesach. Rabbi Shimon says the other extreme. So we've got three positions here. We've got Rabbi Yossi who says she's obliged for both. We've got Rabbi Yehuda says she's obliged for Pesach Rishon, but not for Pesach Sheni. And Rabbi Shimon, the misogynist, says she is not obliged on first or second, right? Rabbi Shimon says a woman on the first Pesach, we make her ancillary to others, so she can join in on the others. On the second one, not at all. She's out of the picture completely. Nothing to do with her. So now that was the Gemarah. Now the Gemarah then tries to work out what's going on here with these three different opinions. What are they arguing about? Why have they got different opinions? What do they base their argument on? Rabbi Yehuda was the middle ground. He said women are obliged for Pesach Rishon, but are not obliged for Pesach Sheni, although they can join somebody else's Korban. And he says, because you've got to look at the two different psukim. The psukim that deal with Pesach Rishon have different language to the psukim that deal with Pesach Sheni. That's what he says. And we're going to look at those psukim now. That's why I asked Leon to get them ready. So the psukim that deal with Pesach Rishon, in other words, the normal, usual Pesach, obviously are in Sefer Shemot when we're talking about the Exodus from Egypt. It's chapter 12, verse 4, and it is on the screen for you now. And let's look at the language. First of all, I'll ask Leon to read verse 4, and then I will look at the Hebrew with you.
But if the household is excuse me, but if the household is too small for a lamb or kid, then he and his neighbor who is near the house shall take according to the number of people. Everyone according to what he eats shall be counted for the lamb or kid.
Okay, so let's look at that carefully. If the household is too small for a lamb, what's it talking about there? Well, we know, don't we, that everybody has to take a Korban Pesach. But what happens if you live on your own, or you're just a small family, maybe just a husband and wife, maybe a husband and wife, one kid, pardon the pun, you're not going to be able to eat a whole animal. So what you're allowed to do is join together with your neighbors and you make a group. So you say, right, okay, all the people on this side of Hachatzavim are all going to come together, buy a lamb, and we'll all eat our Korban Pesach together, right? You could have the same in your block of flats. Everybody on floors 1 to 4 will be counted on this Korban, floors 5 to 8, etc. That's what they're talking about. So if the household's too small for and I would have put in brackets there, a whole lamb, then he, that's male, look at the Hebrew, who, right, that's he, so that's male. The male and his neighbor, okay, ushchino, and his neighbor's in masculine as well. They will take a lamb according to the number of people. Now in English, people is parav, isn't it? It's it's not masculine or feminine. It's a bit like these non-binary people, right? People are people. They can be either male, females, or something else. Now, what have we got in the Hebrew? Let's have a look. Hu ushcheno, he and his neighbor, Akarov, who's close to him, El Beito, is close to his house. B'michsat nefashot. Okay, let's look at those two words. Let's look at michsat first, because I can show you a bit of modern Hebrew as well. B'michsat nefashot. What word can you see there in the middle of that word? Michsat nefashot. Ladies who, or men, I suppose, for that matter, that was a little bit sexist of me, who shop for the kitchen might know this. When you go in to buy your chad pa'ami stuff. Avril, when you go into the shop to buy your disposable foil dishes, and you want your dishes and you want them to have lids, what do you ask for? Michseh. Thank you, Marcel. Michseh is a lid. And why is a michseh a lid? What does that lid do?
Covers.
It covers. That's right. So this word here, michsat nefashot. You know what nefashot is, don't you?
Souls.
Nefashot are souls. So b'michsat nefashot, that cover the souls. So in other words, it's the number of people. It's a biblical expression for the number of people. Michsat nefashot. Now, nefashot means souls, and it's described here as people. And we use that word in English, don't we? You know, the number of souls that went down to Egypt with Jacob was 70 souls. We use that expression, it's a bit old-fashioned, but we use that expression in English as well. So souls means people. Now, do women have souls? Well, some of them, yeah. I can think of a few that don't, but yeah. Women have souls. So when you use that word nefashot, that is including women. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, this is talking about the Korban Pesach and who will be counted in the Korban Pesach. The neighbor, the bloke, takes the Korban, and according to the number of souls, including women. So Rabbi Yehuda uses this expression and says, this proves that with Pesach Rishon, with the main Pesach, women are included because it uses that word nefashot deliberately to include women. With me so far? Yeah? Okay. Now, Rabbi Yehuda wants us to look at the psukim which are used for Pesach Sheni. And we will find those in the Parsha of B'Ha'alotcha, coming up in a few weeks' time. It's in Bamidbar chapter 9. And there it is. Verse 13, Leon, please.
But a man who is pure and was not on the road and had refrained from making the Pesach offering, that soul shall be cut off from the people, for he had not offered Hashem's offering in its appointed time. That man will bear his sin.
Okay, now I meant, before I got you to read that, I did want you to read that. I want you to read 10 first, please. I meant to get you to read verse 10 first.
Speak to the children of Israel, saying, if any man shall become contaminated through a human corpse or on a distant road, whether you or your generations, he shall make the Pesach offering for Hashem. In the second month, on the 14th day in the afternoon, shall he make it. With matzahs and bitter herbs shall he eat it.
Okay, now, did you hear very carefully? I'm sure that you did, because you're all woke. And so because you're all woke, you know exactly that you have to be very careful which pronouns you use for people today. I don't know about you lot, but I'm starting to get emails from people that tell me at the bottom of their email what their pronoun is. And I have to refer to Angela Jones as they. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to refer to Angela Jones as they, because Angela Jones is a single person and they is plural. So Angela Jones will be she, as far as I'm concerned, whether she likes it or not. But pronouns are very important. Leon, who's now just disappeared, very carefully read out the translation in his art scroll, and he said, because I was listening carefully, speak to the children of Israel, saying, any man who becomes unclean. Now look at my screen, if you will, and look at my translation, the Chabad translation. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, any person who becomes unclean. Now then, in our Gemarah, it's very important, isn't it? Whether this is a man or it's a person. Now let's have a look at the Hebrew. Daber b'nei Yisrael lemor, ish, ish. Not only is it a man, it's a definite man. It's a double man. Okay, ish, ish, any man. It's stressing that it's a man. So this translation over here gets the big thumbs down because it's not accurate. Whoever translated this Chabad translation, I'm giving them a low mark because they haven't learned Gemarah Pesachim 91b, because if they had, they would have been more careful with their translation and they would have translated it like the art scroll, which of course has learned Pesachim 91b and deliberately uses the expression man. Okay, ish, ish, a man who becomes unclean. Now look at the rest of it. What should he do? Verse 11, Ya'asu oto. Okay, they shall do it. That's in the plural, but it's masculine plural. Okay, it's about a man. And then verse 13 was, again, this is what happens to the man who was ritually clean and just failed to do it. He doesn't get second chance. It's only if you were ritually unclean or a long way away. But again, second chance is only for ish, for a man. Let's go back to the Gemarah. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that the use of the word souls in the first verse, according to the number of souls, includes everyone, even women, because women have souls. So in the first Pesach, according to Rabbi Yehuda, women are obliged. And if you say that, if so, even on the second Pesach, women should be included. But it's written with regard to one who had not offered the Paschal lamb, that man shall bear his sin, which indicates a man, yes, a woman, no. So Rabbi Yehuda has looked very carefully at the psukim that we just looked at, made the distinction between nefashot over here and ish over here. Where are we? There, ish over here, and has come to the conclusion that women are obliged in the first and not obliged in the second. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Now, if we go back to Pesachim, then we will then go and see Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi was the one that says that they're obliged in both. We go through all that, and then the Gemarah says, what about Reb Shimon, who says they're not obliged in either? And we have different opinions. We're not going to go into any more of that now. I just wanted to show you the origins of our Gemarah. I'll go back to our Gemarah now in the Pesachim. So this is where Chizkiyahu got mixed up. Chizkiyahu originally...
Sorry, Johnny. Sorry, why can't we go over exactly why the others looked at the same words and came to different conclusions?
We can, if you want. You want to do that? Okay.
Oh, well, I do, but maybe everybody else doesn't. I don't know. I was just wondering.
No, all right, let's do it. No, I never want to be accused of going too fast. That's not something I think that he could really accuse me of doing, going too fast at the speed that we learn at. Let's go back to our Gemarah then. Hang on. Right. Okay. Let's carry on then. Okay. Rabbi Yossi, what is his reason for his opinion? It says there, b'michsat nafashot, according to the number of souls, including a woman, and then according to the second Pesach in Numbers. I skirted over this because I didn't think we were going to do it, but since we're there, look what happens if you don't do it right, and you don't do the Pesach when you should. V'nichrata hanefesh hahi me'ameha, the soul will be cut off. His soul, it says in my translation. V'nichrata hanefesh hahi. Rabbi Yossi says, look, it's the same word, nefesh. If you're going to tell me that in Shmot, nefesh includes a woman, well, then you can't turn around and say in Bamidbar, nefesh doesn't include a woman. So they both include a woman. So that's why Rabbi Yossi says they are obliged in both. Rabbi Yossi gets knocked down on that, by the way, because if you look at that word nefesh in context, it's all about an ish. V'ha'ish, and the man, asher hu tahar, he is pure. Ubaderech lo haya, and he was not on a journey. V'chadal la'asot ha-pesach, and he failed to do the Pesach. V'nichrata ha-nefesh hahi me'ameha, that soul will get cut off. It's obvious in that context that it's referring to a man. Rabbi Yossi doesn't buy that. He says nefesh, nefesh. You can't distinguish between nefesh in one place and nefesh in another. It's a weak argument, really. Rabbi Yossi is on shaky ground, to be honest, but that's his view. Okay?
And how would you interpret the fact that nefesh is a feminine noun?
Because women have got a greater soul than men.
Okay, and therefore women should be included if it's nefesh hahi.
And yeah, and that's what Rabbi Yossi would say. I personally think that's a bit weak because the context of this nefesh is clearly male. You're right, nefesh is a feminine word. And the reason that nefesh is a feminine word is that the qualities of a nefesh, with the positive qualities of a nefesh, are those of a woman. Women have a greater and more sensitive and higher soul than do men. That is an accepted approach in Jewish thinking. They don't have as much value in terms of a monetary value, but that's generally speaking because they don't have the same ability to do physical work. But in terms of spirituality, nefesh is a feminine word because women have a greater soul. But in this particular pasuk, I think that you would certainly have, let's put it this way, you'd have sympathy for the view that doesn't accept Rabbi Yossi's opinion because it's clearly in the context talking about a woman. But that's his view. That's where Rabbi Yossi comes from. Let's have a look at Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon was the one who says they're not obliged in either. Let's have a look at what he says a bit further down the page. Here we go. And Rabbi Shimon, what's his reason for the opinion? Well, it says, he's very clear, isn't it? And he says it's all about an ish. Ish, in, isha, lo. A man, yes. A woman, no. Okay. So then he'll say, well, what about what you're going to do with the souls? That then the michsat nefashot bit. Then he's going to say they can be added in as a part of a group, but they're not. You wouldn't do it especially for her because the mitzvah is on the man because the pasuk says ish. Let's have a look exactly what we're talking about here. There we go. This is talking about verse 3 here. Dabru al kol adat Yisrael. Speak to the whole of the congregation of Israel, saying on the 10th Ve'esol HaChodesh, Hazeh, on the 10th of this month, V'yikchu lahem ish seh labeit avot seh labeit. Ish, a man. Each man shall take a lamb or a kid for his household. Rabbi Shimon says the initial mitzvah, the initial commandment was to a man. The michsat nefashot, this idea that you can join up together, means that women can join in, but the obligation of the Korban Pesach is on an ish. And I think that you would say that is, again, quite persuasive, but I would come back against Rabbi Shimon and look at this word here. Dabru el kol adat Yisrael. Kol adat Yisrael usually means all of the congregation of Israel, usually means the women as well. So if you're speaking to all of the congregation, including the women, why would you need the women to hear if the commandment was only to a man? So I would have a go at Rabbi Shimon for that, and I think that Rabbi Yehuda's position, which is the middle ground, you know me, I always like to take a middle ground. Rabbi Yehuda's position, the middle ground, is the one that I like the best. But there you go. I
think that the women needed to hear it so that they could remind the men that they had to do it. Otherwise, they wouldn't remember.
That's quite right, and I think that the reason they had to do it on the afternoon of the 14th of Nisan was to get them out from under the women's feet while they're trying to get ready for Pesach. Get the men out of the way, send them off to the base of Mikdash with an animal, get them to do something else, so they're not in my way while I'm trying to get ready for Pesach, right? Okay, so those are the three opinions, and you can see from the psukim how each of the rabbis interpreted these different psukim. Now, the beauty of all of that, of course, is the message of all of that is how many times have we read those psukim, heard them lamed, read them in various places, and did we take any notice of the subtleties of the language? No, of course we didn't. Only when we learned the Gemarah of Pesachim, remember this is something written 1500 years ago, the sophistication. I know I've said this many, many times before, but it never ceases to amaze me. The sophistication of thought, the attention to detail, the depth of argument and the logic that is being put forward. As Lord Tony Pandy said, when the rest of the world were wandering around in caves, we were at this incredibly high intellectual level. It's just remarkable. The Gemarah and the Mishnah are remarkable pieces of learning in and of themselves. Whether you consider them to be holy writings or not holy writings is a different issue altogether. But the value that they have and the awe, 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 that we should have for these writings is demonstrated by what we've learned today. So let's just go off that screen now and just go back to the Gemarah to finish off for a minute and to see where we're up to. Let me get our Gemarah back on the screen. There we go. So that was it's a good place to stop actually. So let's just recap what we've done today. We looked at Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda's view, quoting Rabbi Shimon, of what Chizkiyahu HaMelech did wrong. And what he did wrong was he got mixed up as to whether women are counted as being obliged to do the Korban Pesach in Nisan or not. And it was based on the concept that there was a 50-50 situation, or an almost 50-50 situation, and the women who were purer than the men tipped the balance into purity. He thought that meant that the men were in the minority, the impure men were in the minority, and they had to go and do it on the Pesach Sheni. In fact, he changed his mind, and he held, in the end, he held like Rabbi Shimon in the end. He held like Rabbi Shimon, who held that women were not obliged in the first Korban Pesach, and if they weren't obliged, they don't count in the numbers, and therefore we had a majority of men who were impure. They should not have been told to push it off to Pesach Sheni. They should have been told to bring it whilst they were Tamei on Pesach Rishon, and that's why Chizkiyahu had to ask for forgiveness, because he made a mistake. And that is Rabbi Shimon's view, and I suspect that that's consistent, because Rabbi Shimon was the one who said that women were not obliged to bring the Korban Pesach on Pesach Rishon. I don't know whether this is the same Rabbi Shimon here that's being quoted. I suspect it is, because it makes sense. It's consistent. And usually when we just say Rabbi so-and-so, it's usually the same person. Not always, but usually. So I suspect this is the same Rabbi Shimon. David's going to correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I've got another issue with this, that you just brought this Brisa in Pesachim, which gives the three different opinions, all of which could be correct. And I've just looked in the ArtScroll note on the conclusion to the Sugya, which is most unclear, that the Gemarah actually paskins according to Rabbi Yehuda, i.e. that women are obliged in the first Korban Pesach, but the second is elective only. But that's not thoroughly clear. Now, going back to Chizkiyahu, why are we blaming...
Before you go to Chizkiyahu, David, let's just have a look over. Let's just have a look, before you go to Chizkiyahu, let's just have a look at the right-hand side of the page here. Have you still got it on the screen? Yeah, okay. Halakha here. Women have an obligation to participate in the first Pesach. Both men and women are obligated to participate in the mitzvah of the Paschal offering. This is the ruling of the Rambam, in accordance with the opinions of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda, and in opposition to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, as discussed in Tractate Pesachim and Rambam. So actually, the halacha, according to the Rambam, is not like Rabbi Shimon and not like Chizkiyahu. So go ahead.
And that's partly my question. But again, if you look in the art scroll on Pesachim, that ruling that Rav Steinsaltz gives isn't totally clear. There's a dispute amongst the Rishonim as to whether the halacha as far as Pesach Sheni is concerned is only when Pesach Sheni falls on Shabbos, and are women to be allowed to be doche Shabbos in order to bring a korban which is only elective. Okay, that's another way of interpreting the Gemarah according to these notes here. But my simple question, going back to Chizkiyahu, why are we blaming Chizkiyahu for not knowing a halacha in Torah Sheba Al Peh that even the Tanaim are in dispute over, and there doesn't appear to be a clear halachic outcome from the Tanaim?
Okay, so if you go back to the recording of the last Gemarah Shir 2 weeks ago, you will see that I asked exactly that question. And I said, I didn't actually ask the question, but I said in a sort of throwaway remark, and if you want to look, it's around about minute 58, 59, something like that, because I listened to it last night. I actually said, I don't know why we can blame Chizkiyahu, because this Gemarah was written 1,000 years later. Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think you can only say that actually what Chizkiyahu did was that he reconsidered his own opinion and I suppose worked something out for himself and decided that he had erred unless somebody else came along to him. Remember, Chizkiyahu was a Baal Tshuva, and we all know, don't we, that Baal Tshuvas don't always get it right, and sometimes it's a kindness. I have been speaking to somebody in our shul this last few days about something which they have been doing, which they think has been absolutely right, but actually is wrong. And that is that there's a couple of people in our shul who are very makpid, very careful to daven very slowly. And that's a wonderful thing. So what they do is they get there very early and they start their davening. And I noticed that by the time we start Shmona Esrei, they're already into Tachanun. By the time we've finished, they're just about finishing as well, because they're very slow. But what it means is that they are not saying Shmona Esrei with the rest of the Kehillah. They're saying Shmona Esrei while we are still in Psukei Zimra, or at best in the brachas of the Shema. Well, what they don't know is that actually the whole point of going to shul is so that you should say Shmona Esrei together with the Kehillah. So by them going to shul very early and being very careful about how they daven, which is a wonderful thing, they're actually missing the tefillah b'tzibur. They're not actually fulfilling the mitzvah of davening together with the community, because they've said Shmona Esrei, which is the tefillah, which is the main tefillah. They've said it while we're saying something else. So the same thing applies for somebody who comes in late. You might think you're doing the right thing to catch up and to start at the beginning and work your way through. No, the whole point of going to shul is to daven Shmona Esrei with the tzibur. So if you come in late, not that any of you would come in late, of course, but if you were to come in late and you see that we are actually up to Shmona Esrei, then you should do your jolly best to be at Shmona Esrei and we're at Shmona Esrei. So if you've got time, you can say brachot, Baruch She'amah, Ashrei, Yishtabach, Shema, and then say Shmona Esrei. If you've no time at all and you walk in when we're saying Shmona Esrei, you can say Shmona Esrei with us and then go back and do the rest of it. Because the most important thing is tefillah b'tzibur. How did we get onto that? Baalei Tshuva, Chizkiyahu probably thought he was doing the right thing. Somebody came along and said, no, you've got it wrong. And then when he realized he'd got it wrong, he then had to seek forgiveness from God for his mistake. Okay, any questions? Any more questions, I should say, really? Okay, there we go. Back to normality now then. Back to the Gemarah share. That was our usual pace. We did about 4 lines, plus a whole load of Pesachim 91b. So thank you to Julia for making us go back and do the whole of that. All right, see you all. Have a wonderful Lag BaOmer. Don't make any bonfires. It's environmentally unfriendly. It's a pagan custom. It has nothing to do with Judaism. And Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai did not die on Lag BaOmer. For further explanation, watch this space.
And if you do make bonfires, don't make them next to my house, please.
Quite right. Bye, everyone.